The box was wrapped in brown paper and addressed to me in my dead wife's handwriting, postmarked 3 days after she was buried. I am not a man who cries easily. I survived 41 years of marriage, 2 wars, a triple bypass, and the kind of quiet loneliness that settles into a house when the kids leave, and you and your wife stop talking about anything deeper than grocery lists. I thought I had seen everything life could throw at a person. But standing on the porch of my daughter's house, which used to be my house, the house my wife Eleanor and I had bought in 1987 for $112,000, holding a cardboard box filled with everything I owned, watching my son-in-law Marcus lock the front door from the inside, I realized I had not seen anything at all. My name is Daniel Hargrove. I am 71 years old, and on the afternoon of October 14th, I became homeless. It had been 6 days since we buried Eleanor. Let me go back to the beginning of that week, because if I am going to tell this story, I need to tell it right. Eleanor had been sick for 2 years. Pancreatic cancer, the kind they find too late, the kind that takes what it wants and leaves nothing behind. She fought it the way she fought everything in her life, quietly, stubbornly, without complaint. She went to her chemotherapy appointments alone because she said she didn't want me sitting in those waiting rooms getting maudlin. She made dinners even when she couldn't eat them. She ironed her blouses 3 days before she died. When the end came, it came fast. A Tuesday night, a rattling breath, a hand that went still in mine. And then the silence that is unlike any other silence, the silence of a room where someone used to breathe. Our daughter Renata flew in from Phoenix the next morning. She was red-eyed and stricken, and for the first day she was my daughter again, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest watching baseball games, who called me daddy until she was 12 and then stopped, the way children stop doing the tender things without telling you. We sat at the kitchen table and drank bad coffee and talked about her mother. We cried a little. It was the closest we had been in years. Then Marcus arrived. Marcus Bellamy, Renata's husband of 9 years, a man who had the handshake of a politician and the eyes of someone always calculating the next move. He was not a bad man exactly. I had tried to believe that for a long time. He was a real estate developer in Phoenix, good at turning empty lots into profitable things, and he had that quality common to people in his profession, a certainty that every problem had a solution if you just repositioned the variables. I was apparently a variable. The house I was living in, Eleanor's and my house, had been transferred into Renata's name 4 years earlier. This was not a secret, or at least, Eleanor had told me it was not a secret. She had explained it carefully one afternoon over coffee, for tax purposes, for estate planning, to avoid probate. I had signed the papers without reading them closely because Eleanor handled all of that. Eleanor had handled everything. What I had not known, what I had not read closely enough to know, was that the transfer was unconditional. The house was Renata's, not mine and Renata's, not held in trust for my lifetime. Renata's outright, with no provisions for me to remain there after Eleanor's death. I did not know this until Marcus sat me down at my own kitchen table on the 3rd day after the funeral, with Renata standing behind him like a person who cannot look at what they are participating in, and explained it to me. "We've been thinking," he said, and I noticed he said we the way a general says we, meaning himself, with the others conscripted. The house is a significant asset. The Phoenix market is difficult right now, and we need to liquidate some holdings. "This is my home," I said. "It's listed in Renata's name," he said. "It has been for 4 years." Marcus, that was all I said, just his name. I looked at my daughter. Renata was studying the kitchen floor. She had her mother's dark hair but not her mother's spine. "We need to move quickly," Marcus continued. "We've already talked to a realtor. We're listing it next week. We've arranged a unit for you. It's a very nice assisted living facility in." "I am not going to assisted living," I said. "I am 71 years old. I mow my own lawn." "Dad," Renata's voice finally, thin and apologetic. "It's a really nice place. It has a pool." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked around my kitchen, at the dent in the cabinet door, where I'd hit it with a toolbox in 1994, at the window above the sink where Alina had kept her herbs, at the scuff on the baseboards from every Christmas morning the kids had come barreling down the hallway. "Give me a week," I said. Marcus opened his mouth. "A week," I said again, and something in my voice must have reached back through 40 years and found the man I used to be, because he closed his mouth and nodded. I spent that week in a fog. I called my son, Thomas, in Seattle, but Thomas was in the middle of a divorce of his own and could barely keep his head above water. He was sorry. He was genuinely sorry. He sent me $200 by Venmo, which struck me as both touching and absurd. I called Alina's sister, Dottie, in Tallahassee. Dottie was 83 and hard of hearing and kept asking me to speak up. She said it was a shame and a sin. That was the most helpful thing anyone said to me that week. I packed slowly. There are two types of packing, the kind you do when you're moving towards something and the kind you do when you've been forced out. I was doing the second kind, which means every object becomes an argument with yourself about whether it matters. I left behind the living room furniture and most of the kitchen things. I took my tools, my books, the box of photographs from under the bed, and Alina's chair, a wingback green armchair that she had reupholstered herself 3 times over the years. Marcus said the chair was old and I could leave it. I carried it to the truck myself. On the 6th day after the funeral, 6 days, not 7, because Marcus was not a man who gave people what he promised. He knocked on my bedroom door at 9 in the morning and said the realtor was coming at noon to take photographs, and they needed me out. I came out with my 2 bags and my chair loaded in a borrowed truck, and Marcus handed me a piece of paper with the address of the assisted living facility. I didn't take it. I walked to the truck, started the engine, and drove away from the only home I had known for 36 years. I was not entirely without a plan, but I will not pretend the plan was good. I drove to the Sundown Motor Inn on Route 9 and paid for 2 weeks with my credit card, and sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like carpet cleaner, and thought about what a man does when he is 71 and has nothing. That was when my phone buzzed with the notification from the post office. A package was waiting for me. Sender, Alina R. Hargrove. The date on the tracking notification showed it had been shipped 4 days before she died. I sat with my phone in my hands for a long time. Alina had known she was dying. She had known for months exactly how this was going to go, the trajectory, the timeline, the end. Of course she had planned. Alina planned everything. What I could not understand was why she had mailed it rather than simply leaving it for me to find. Then I understood. She had mailed it so it would arrive after everything else happened. She had timed it like a conductor timing a final note. I picked it up from the post office the next morning. A medium-sized box, brown paper, her handwriting, still her handwriting, even at the end. I sat in the truck in the parking lot and stared at my name in her script for a long time before I opened it. Inside there were 4 things. The first was a letter, 12 pages handwritten, which Alina had somehow found the energy to write in the last month of her life. I will not reproduce it here because some things belong only to the person they were written for. But I will say that it began. "Daniel, my darling idiot, I need to tell you some things you should have known years ago and didn't because you trusted me, which was your greatest virtue and also your greatest inconvenience." That was Alina. Even dying, she was Alina. The second thing in the box was a folder of documents. Thick, tabbed, organized with the thoroughness that had characterized every aspect of Alina's existence. She had been a paralegal for 22 years before she retired, and it showed. The third thing was a smaller box within the box, a jewelry box, containing her mother's pearl earrings and a note that said, "For Renata, when she deserves them again." The fourth thing was a key. I read the letter 3 times before I touched anything else. I read it in the truck, then I went back to my motel room and read it again, and then I sat in the green wingback chair, which took up most of the room, and read it one final time. Alina had known about Marcus for longer than I had. She had known things I had not let myself know, which is the curse of the person in a family who pays attention. She had watched her daughter's marriage with the careful eye of someone who loves their child too much to interfere and too much to say nothing, and over the years she had documented what she saw. Marcus had a financial history that explained his urgency about the house. 3 business ventures in the last 5 years had failed in ways that were not exactly fraudulent, but were close enough to the line that several investors had threatened litigation. He had significant debts. He had been pushing Renata toward liquidating family assets for 2 years, since before Alina got sick, in fact. The house was not a recent idea. It was the plan all along. But here was the thing Alina had not just documented. Here was the thing she had fixed, quietly, in the way she fixed everything, without telling me because she knew I would handle it badly. She had a second estate, a small one but real. Savings accounts I hadn't known about, built over decades from her paralegal work, from her mother's inheritance, from small careful investments she had made on her own. Not hidden from me in any malicious sense. She had told me about the accounts once years ago, and I had nodded in the way I nodded at financial things and promptly forgot. But she had never transferred them. They were in her name and her name only. And she had changed the beneficiary designations 18 months ago. Not to Renata, to me. The folder contained account statements, beneficiary confirmation letters, and a note in Alina's handwriting explaining the process for claiming them. It also contained a letter from her attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen, whose card was paperclipped to the top, explaining that Alina had retained her specifically to assist me after her death, and that her services were already paid for. The key was to a safe deposit box at First Community Bank on Laurel Street. I sat in my green chair in my 10-by-12 motel room and felt something I had not felt in 6 days. I felt Alina in the room with me, not as a ghost, not as anything supernatural, but as a presence, the way a person remains present in the choices they made and the trouble they took on your behalf. I felt her sitting across from me, watching me read, waiting for the moment I understood. "You planned all of this," I said aloud to the empty room. I could almost hear her. "Of course I did. You think I was going to leave you to manage on your own?" I called Patricia Chen the next morning. She was businesslike, warm, and clearly had been expecting my call. She walked me through everything in 45 minutes. There was a total of $212,000 across 3 accounts, now legally mine. There was a life insurance policy I had known about. We had both known about that, but there was also a second, smaller policy I had not known about, which added another $60,000. "Your wife was very organized," Patricia said. "She was the most organized person I ever knew," I said. "She was also very fond of you," Patricia said, and something in her voice told me that Alina had talked to her, had sat in this woman's office and talked about me, and I had to press my fingers against my eyes for a moment. "What about the house?" I asked. "The house transfer was legal," Patricia said. "I won't mislead you about that. If Renata chooses to sell it, she can." "I know," I said. "However," Patricia continued, "there are some things your son-in-law may not be aware of. Your wife took certain steps." A pause. "I'd suggest you come in so we can discuss them in person." What Alina had done was this. She had spent the last 18 months of her life, quietly and without drama, protecting me, not just financially. She had met with her old colleagues in the legal community. She had consulted with an elder law specialist. She had written letters, made calls, signed documents. The house, as Marcus correctly understood, was Renata's. But the contents of the house, everything inside it, every piece of furniture, every appliance, every item that had been there when the transfer was made, was listed in a separate personal property agreement that Alina had filed with the county. Any sale of the house required the buyer to compensate the estate of Alina Hargrove for the personal property within it, at appraised value. The estate of Alina Hargrove had been transferred to me. Additionally, Alina had consulted with a tenants' rights attorney about a concept called equitable interest. The idea that a person who lives in a home contributes to its maintenance and mortgage payments, and has every reasonable expectation of remaining there, has certain protections regardless of whose name is on the deed. It was not a perfect argument. Patricia was honest about that. It would likely not have prevailed in court. But it would have been expensive, time-consuming, and public, and Marcus, who had investors and a professional reputation to maintain, was not well positioned for that kind of scrutiny. "Your wife knew," Patricia said, "that she couldn't stop what was happening, but she could make it costly enough that a negotiation was preferable to a fight." "She always said," I told Patricia, "that the best way to win an argument was to make the other person realize they didn't want to win it." Patricia smiled. I could hear it in her phone voice. She said the same thing to me. I called Renata that evening. Not Marcus, Renata. I asked her to meet me alone without her husband at the coffee shop on 5th Street where she and I used to go when she was in high school and things were difficult at home, before Marcus, before Phoenix, before she became someone I didn't entirely recognize. She came. She was 43 years old and she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the life she had been living. And for a moment, sitting across from her with my coffee and her chamomile tea, I forgot about the house and the boxes and the motel room and just saw my daughter. I told her about Alina's box. Not all of it, not the parts about Marcus's financial troubles, not yet. I told her about the accounts, the insurance, Patricia Chen. I told her I was not destitute and would not be going to assisted living. She listened without speaking. Her hands were wrapped around her mug. "Mom did all that," she said finally. "Your mother did everything," I said. "She always did everything. I just didn't always notice." A long silence. Then Renata said, "I didn't want to do this, Dad. I want you to know that." "I know," I said. "He said it was the only way to." She stopped. "I know," I said again. She was crying quietly. Renata had always cried quietly, the way Alina did, holding it in rather than letting it out, as if grief were something to be managed rather than felt. "What happens now?" she asked. I pulled Patricia's card across the table toward her. "There are some things about your husband's finances that you should know," I said. "Not from me, from your mother. She left documentation. Patricia Chen can walk you through it." Renata stared at the card. She knew. She knew a lot of things. Another silence. Then, was she angry at me? I thought about the letter, the 12 handwritten pages. I thought about the jewelry box, the pearl earrings wrapped in tissue paper, the note that said for Renata when she deserves them again. "No," I said, "she wasn't angry, she was your mother." The negotiations took 6 weeks. That is the only word for what they were, negotiations, conducted through lawyers, civil but not warm. Marcus, as Patricia had predicted, did not want the expense or the visibility of a court fight. He had, it turned out, more to worry about than just the house. What Alina had documented in that folder was not enough to constitute legal action on its own, but it was enough, when reviewed by the right people, to make certain investors ask certain questions. This was not something I pursued. Patricia advised me not to pursue it, but the existence of the documentation, the fact that Alina had gathered it, that it existed, that it was now in the hands of her estate attorney, was enough to shift the balance. The final arrangement was this. I would purchase the house from Renata at fair market value, using the money from Alina's accounts. The price was fair. Marcus had pushed for more, but Renata had, somewhere in those 6 weeks, found some of her mother's spine. I would own the house outright. Marcus and Renata would return to Phoenix. I signed the papers on a Tuesday morning in December, 2 months after the funeral. I drove back to the house alone. I let myself in with my old key, which I had never returned, and I stood in the hallway and smelled the specific smell of it, wood and old books, and whatever Alina had used to clean the floors for 36 years, and I let myself feel it, the weight and the relief of it. I brought Alina's green chair back from the motel room and put it in its place by the window. Marcus and Renata are still married. I do not know if they will remain so. Renata calls me on Sundays now, not every Sunday, but most, and we talk for 20 minutes about ordinary things, her garden, my chess club, the weather in Phoenix versus the weather here. We do not talk about those 6 weeks. There will be time for that conversation later, or there won't, and either way I have decided not to be the one to force it. Alina would have said, give her room to come back. Thomas came to visit in January. He stayed for a week, slept in his old room, and helped me put up new shelves in the garage. On his last night, we sat in the living room, me in Alina's green chair, him on the couch, and he said, "She always knew what she was doing, didn't she?" "Always," I said. "I feel like she's still in the house." I looked at the chair, at the herbs, dried now, still hanging above the kitchen sink because I couldn't bring myself to take them down, at the dent in the cabinet door. "She is," I said. There are things I know now that I did not know 6 months ago. I know that love is not just a feeling. It is a practice, a discipline, a decision made quietly every day over decades. I know that Alina loved me in the specific language of preparation, of forethought, of taking trouble on behalf of someone who didn't always deserve it. I know that I was not as good a partner as she was. I am trying, in whatever time I have left, to be more like her. I know that children can become strangers and then, maybe, with patience, something like themselves again. I know that the things we don't read carefully enough can undo us. I read everything now. Every document, every contract, every form. It is too late for it to be anything but a tribute to Alina, but I read it all. And I know that a person who loves you enough will spend the last months of their life making sure that after they are gone, you will be all right. That is a kind of love so large I don't have a word for it. I look for the word sometimes, late at night, sitting in the green chair. Alina always said I wasn't a man who cried easily. She was right, mostly. But I am not the same man I was before the box arrived, before I read 12 pages of her handwriting, before I understood the full architecture of what she had built around me without my knowing. Last week I found the last page of her letter. I had missed it. It had slipped under the lining of the box. It was short, just 2 sentences. "The house will be yours again, Daniel. I made sure of it." She had made sure of everything, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that one of us did.